Hey there, how are you? Still have not finished going through tests, by the way. It's a slow process on the subnetting. We're almost there. We've got just one more class period, and I don't want you guys to stress too much over this class. I do want you to do uh, the work or the research, even if you don't get it done by the time the end of the class comes around here. But you do definitely want to keep researching this stuff and playing with this stuff. But at this point, I'm not going to make the Wireshark assignment a mandatory assignment. You can install Wireshark and play with it if you want. But I kind of find it less and less important in terms of network management. That's more like what the tech guys use as Wireshark. You guys as MIS managers, you'll get better use of learning how to use and something like draw.io and updating documentation. That's really more important and more pertinent for you guys as managers, is documenting and managing a network, not actually doing the troubleshooting and what we call firefighting, which is, still has the notes up here from last class. You need to know this term for the test, by the way. Firefighting is something that network managers don't want and should not be doing. That is dealing with problems after they've been discovered or as they occur. In other words, it is not preventative. That is bad. Firefighting is necessary sometimes because we can't prevent or predict everything, guys, like the COVID-19 virus thing, for example. So there is going to be a certain amount of firefighting going on, but that's typically going to be your computer science and your tech guys, the guys that you guys are managing. Now, you as a network manager do need to know the concepts and the best way to deal with things, but I try to avoid, unfortunately, that's what I get paid to do a lot, is the firefighting, but I try to avoid in my own personal business having to deal with fires by preventing fires. So how do you guys prevent fires in real life? And don't say install smoke detectors, because smoke detectors don't prevent fires. A smoke detector would be an example of a detective control. I'm getting a drink here. And a corrective control would be send in the firefighters to put that fire out. So smoke detector is a detective control. It's literally called that. But a preventative control would be don't have flammable liquids in your home. I'm using a real world analogy here. In other words, don't do dumb things and follow procedures so that you don't, the likelihood, you're trying to reduce the likelihood of an event occurring. Prevention equals reduce the risk. Not really reduce the risk, reduce the likelihood of a threat. We use passwords, for example, to reduce the risk that somebody will get into our system. It's not 100%, it's not foolproof, so that's why we say reduce. Doesn't eliminate that risk, but it significantly reduces it. So as I mentioned in the last class, the cheapest and the most effective way to keep hackers, or I should say intruders or unauthorized access from occurring is a password. Passwords usually consist of 2 things, sometimes 3 or 4 things. So let me just talk about passwords for a minute before I bring the notes back up, because this is important stuff in terms of passwords. A password can either be something that you know, like Jake123. That's not my password, by the way. I'm using that as an example. Or something that you have, like a key card, or your Cougar card. That's like a password that gets you in the door, or something that you are, and that's what biometrics is. Anybody in here use biometrics for anything? I bet you do. If you have an iPhone or even an Android, you're already using biometrics. Pros and cons of biometrics. I'm going to turn, guys, I'm losing my voice. I need to get a drink real quick. I'll be right back. But think about the cons of biometrics. Okay. See if that'll tide me over. Okay, so we're just talking about passwords right now, guys. Here's the either use a written or a known password. Sometimes we also call that a key or a secret. By the way, so that's something that you know. What are the advantages to using a written password? Either say it on your mic or type it in the chat window. Why are written passwords, or I shouldn't say written down, but why are typed out passwords good? Anybody? Rahi, are you there? Joel? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, we can hear you.
Why do we still use written passwords? We've got all these other technologies like key cards and biometrics. Why do we still use written passwords? Or keyed in passwords, I should say.
I guess like they're easy to distribute. Like you can do randomized password generators and just give those to
that is one way. That's one good positive, is that they are easy to change. If you lose your key card or your key to your car, for example, you want to use that analogy, it's pretty hard to get that replaced. So password is just simply in here, or you ask a network manager, will you please allow me to change my password or randomize a password for me? Also, you can share a keyed password. You're not really supposed to in most worlds, but it does give us that ability. So if you are incapacitated, you burn your hands or something, and you need your girlfriend or your mom or whatever to log into your insurance website to pull up your insurance cards and go to the ER or whatever it is, you can tell them over the phone. You can get the nurse to call them up and say, hey, okay, log into my website, please, or log into my insurance, or log into my bank, send me some money. So you can share it. The obvious cons, what are the cons? before we talk about these other two things. What's the good? Good. Easy to change, shareable. You can change it yourself, usually, because we do something, we these days we can do things like two-factor authentication. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I know a lot of you know what this stuff is already, but I have to go over it for those of you that don't. So what's bad about using keyed passwords?
Someone can guess them.
Yeah, they're guessable. In other words, they're too easy. Because they're easy, they're too easy. Most commonly used password, what would you guess? Most commonly used keyed password.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1, 1, 1. Second most common keyed password is your initials and your date of birth, or some combination of that. It surprises me how many people still do that. By the way, whenever you see these things, and I don't know if you guys participate on Facebook, but you participate in social media. Whenever you see these games online where they say, take your middle name and whatever the first letter of your middle name is, that's your spirit animal. And then take the first 3 digits of your phone number. What those things are, by the way, they post them on Facebook. Those are social media digging tools that bad guys use to steal your identity. So they might sound cute to come up with, what's your Viking name? Well, take your mother's maiden name and mix that with such and such. All of those things that they're asking you for are things that you commonly use in your two-factor authentication or your password remembrance. If you forgot your password, a lot of times, like at your bank website, they ask you to type in 3 or 4 questions to answer that only you should know the answers to, like your mother's maiden name, the city you were born in, or at least the strangers wouldn't know that. So don't ever do those things. Don't ever answer those little silly games that you see on Facebook about what's your Viking name or what's what's your nickname or what's your redneck name or whatever. Those are designed to steal stuff from you. So the bad thing is they are too easy to steal, to guess. Also, they're based on behavior. In other words, we can tell you guys till I'm blue in the face, or I can tell my employees and my clients, do not use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, C, D, E as a password. And no matter what we try to do, we try to tell people and force them with programming. You have to use a combination of uppercase and lowercase and a number and a funky digit as your password, because we're trying to force you guys to use more complicated passwords. But that's up to you. Why don't you guys like to use complicated passwords? Dang, that's your password. Okay, I'm hacking all your stuff, Ella. Uppercase, lowercase. I went to a doctor's office the other day, and their password for their main server was uppercase PASS, lowercase WORD, 123 $. Oh no! Exclamation point. So they took the word password, which they like to use, and this is because they had to satisfy the requirement of their Windows server. Some uppercase, some lowercase, some numbers. So they choose the word password. They chose the first 3 numbers in the numbering scheme, and they chose the first funny digit on the keyboard. Well, maybe the second, actually, if you're not counting that one. That is in a password dictionary, guarantee it. So the point is that human behavior is flawed, or we can't remember. We can't remember complicated passwords. We need to make them complicated, and we can't remember them. I try to get pretty complicated with my passwords. I use a special formula in my head to deformalize a password, and it's dependent upon several things. It's dependent upon the system that I'm logging into and what the OS is on the system. And then I have like a root number that I use, like, my favorite number or something like that. And I do a little mathematical calculation. That's how I have to do that. But I don't use the same passwords on everything. The point is that humans kind of screw that up. And that's only because we can't remember big, long passwords. By the way, that term I used earlier, secret, We call it a password when we as humans are using it. We call it a secret. That's a noun, not an adjective. That is a password that one computer uses to talk to another computer. Two computers sometimes need to talk to each other, and secrets many times are many, many characters long, and they look like, there are all kinds of crazy things because, of course, a computer can remember a 4,000-digit password if it had to. And it also doesn't take any time at all for a computer to type in 4,000 digits, whereas it would take us forever. So next best thing, or a next other thing for passwording, is to use a key card, or I should say something that you have, not something that you know, but something that you have. So passwords are something that you know. Key cards are something that you have, and you all have a Cougar card, right? Or had a Cougar card. Or maybe you have a parking card. Or maybe you literally have, how do you get into your car? You literally have a key, or you have a key fob. You have something that electronically is getting into whatever it is you're trying to get into, a database, a car, a door, whatever it is. Pros and cons to that. The good for key cards is don't have to remember passwords. They're fast. You can literally swipe a key card, or if you go to work for most major tech organizations, you wear a little card around your neck like I do at school, and all I have to do is get close to a door. I don't even have to swipe it. I can just get within a couple feet of a door and it will open the door for me. So don't have to remember anything fast, convenient, as long as you don't, what's the bad thing about key cards or keys? Yes, they can get stolen also, Jessica. Do you guys see what you all type in the comment do you all see this? Do you all see what each other's typing, by the way? Okay, just wanted to make sure. So yeah, so what if people typed in there? They get stolen, they get scanned, you can copy them. You can sometimes copy them. Or they get lost or stolen. Now, the good thing usually about most key cards or most keys in general, if they get stolen, it's really pretty hard to tell what those keys open. So if you lose the keys to your house or lose the keys to your car, that really only inconveniences you. It's unlikely somebody's going to be able to find your car. Yeah, they could probably walk around the parking lot for an hour pushing the button until they eventually heard something go off. Okay, so Tasneem says they work at a place where they make them do both to get through a door. So that is not two-factor authentication, by the way. Some people call that two-factor authentication. That's just dual authentication or combination authentication. So they can be lost or stolen. They can be expensive. To get key cards replaced if you lose them, like for example, if you lose your Cougar card, what do they charge you guys? 20 bucks to replace it? Some places you work for, they make it punitive and they charge you 50 bucks to replace those stupid cards, which only cost them $1, but they had to pay somebody to reprogram the card for you. Another thing about those key cards, by the way, is that they can be global. In other words, you can use a key card to open multiple systems. Yeah, your apartment key bought 50 bucks. Yeah, that's the going rate these days if you lose it. And again, it doesn't cost them much. It costs them literally $1 or less. I buy those things in big boxes all the time, but they do it because they're having to pay some girl behind a desk to reprogram it into the computer. And they're also trying to encourage you not to lose it. Because if you do lose it, that is a liability for them. Because if some bad guy does find it and you did a dumb thing like you wrote your apartment number on the key card, which some people do, the bad guys might be able to get into your apartment or do whatever they want to do. Maybe they won't do it while you're there, but when you leave, or if you leave the hotel, for example, the bad guys will try to get in there. And I'm sure there's some other bad I'm not thinking of. So lost or stolen. Or how about this? Sometimes they have tech issues. They don't work. they get demagnetized, or they break, or they just stop working, or they get wet, or whatever it is. It's not, yeah, yours broke. My key cards wear out all the time. The swipey ones with the magnetic stripes on the back, those wear out. So you got to replace them from time to time. Biometrics, pros and cons. First of all, what is biometrics? That is literally something that you are. Everybody's probably using biometrics in here to access their phone, right? So what do you use to access your phones, guys? Using your thumb print, or your face, or eyes, or whole body, or retinal scan. All that stuff you see in the movies. What's good about biometrics? What are the obvious pros of biometrics? Bio meaning our body, and metric means well, whatever metric means. It's very hard to copy somebody's eyeball or somebody's face. At least with the better biometric systems, they know if it's a copy of a face or not. Retina scans or eyeball scans are literally, no two are alike in the terms of the 1 in a million chance. Your thumbprints, yeah, you can fake thumbprints, but it's pretty difficult to do that. So hard to copy, hard to steal. Pretty hard to steal somebody's thumb or eyeball or whatever, although it happens. Usually they don't steal the actual body part, although if you've ever watched any Quentin Tarantino movies or similar movies like that, they'll show the bad guy using the cut off thumb of somebody at a bank to get into a vault or whatever, which is a silly thing, but that's a possibility. Like key cards, it's quick. Usually it's quick. You don't have to remember. You don't have to remember where your thumb is or your face is or whatever. Also, it's rather automatic a lot of times. Like with your iPhones, for example, the face recognition. You don't even have to say, "Hey, it's me." It just knows it's you. Or here's other biometrics. Voice. I actually access Vanguard. Vanguard is my that's who I use for trading, stock trading. They're like E-Trade and Ameritrade and all that. So when I call them on the phone, a computer answers, and all I have to do is say a sentence. It can't be just, "Hi, I'm Jake." It's a specific sentence they ask you to say, and they have my voice print on file, and it's pretty good. I've never not been able to make it work, and I've tried to get other people to pretend to be me and call in. I'm not going to tell you what it is, and it's a different random thing every time you call in, because if it was the same thing, somebody could just simply copy my voice. But voice printing works pretty well for accessing banks. So as long as your voice hasn't changed. But what are the cons, or what are the bad things about biometrics? Maybe you don't think there are any cons for biometrics other than the unlikely things happening like in the movies where they cut your eyeball out or whatever, which I don't think really happens.
I've seen some stuff about like ethical concerns, like at airports, instead of scanning your passport or whatever, they're starting to do facial recognition, and people are a little concerned about the ethics of like facial recognition like that, like the government having your face and stuff.
Well, that's a good point, and that's why, by the way, what you're talking about is you're talking about the CLEAR system, which is I have what's called global entry, which means I can go in and out of countries fairly easy, and they already have my face and all that. But with this CLEAR system that you're talking about, you don't even have to have your passport. They scan your face automatically, and if you match, they let you through onto the airplane. You pay a little bit of money for that, and I assume what you're referring to is the fact that if that was forced on everybody before you could get on a plane, the ethics are such that, well, maybe the government might decide to use that data 5 years from now, or the next time a COVID-19 virus thing happens, we might use that to track people so that we can do contact tracing. And is it ethical to do that or not? So yeah, that's an important point that a lot of people don't think about. Is it ethical for organizations that are collecting all this data? And it doesn't have to be a government, it could be a company. Companies that are using all this biometric information, they're collecting all this biometric information on you. How do you know that data's safe? How do you know that company's not going to decide years from now to do something with that data that you shared with them? And hopefully that's an appropriate thing that they're doing with it, but maybe not. For example, how many of you have an Echo Dot, or what's the other one? Have an Alexa or the Google Home Mini, one of those things in your house that listens to you all the time. Like I have a couple of them in my house, and I know that, yeah, you have a Google Home. So I know that possibly that data could be used against me or against society in the future. And I'm hoping that Google and Amazon are ethical companies. But my girlfriend, who's a super conspiracy theorist girl, says, "Oh, I'm not coming to your house, or if I come to your house, you need to unplug those things, because I think it's the government listening in on me and listening to everything I say." And I want to tell her, sweetie, government doesn't really care about a school teacher, elementary school teacher from Missouri City. Now, if you were Vladimir Putin or somebody like that, yeah, they might be listening to you. But yeah, it boils down to the ethics. So how many of you have had this situation? You've been talking about something, and you're near your Google Home Mini or your Amazon Echo. You've talked about something, the benefits outweigh the harms. Yeah, I'm with you as well. I like the benefits of it. So I don't mind that I'm an open book. But how many of you have talked about something with your friends or your parents in your home near one of these Echo Dots, and then suddenly the next time you open Facebook or Instagram or whatever, you're seeing ads popping up for the thing you were talking about a couple of hours ago? Has that ever happened to anybody? All the time? So what does that tell you, Danny? I think it's happening. Now, they claim, if you ask Google, or if you Google Google and you Google Amazon, they say, no, we're not using that data. The only time we're ever using that data to direct market to you is if you gave us permission to. So the only thing I can think of is there must have been some backdoor way that we accidentally gave them permission to do that marketing. So in using those biometric tools, we are helping, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but we are helping those companies sell advertising, so that companies that want to sell you something, if they heard you talking about something, oh, I heard him talking about he wants to buy a new car. Hey, I happen to sell new cars. I got a new car for you. So it's just like a guy on the street overhearing you having a conversation. And sometimes that's helpful to you. But now if the whole world can hear you, and the companies providing these networks can sell that information or sell that API or that tool, so that a car company can listen to how many people mention the word Ford or Chevy or Chrysler or Mazda or whatever, and direct advertising towards them on another medium. Is that really ethical? And it's a gray area. If you usually have to opt out, have to make sure that you opt out. Usually when you use these free tools like Chrome and Google Gmail and all these free tools, there's a caveat when it's free. When it's free, it's not really free. Okay, guys? If something is given to you for free, it's not free. There's something, you're paying for it on the back end in some way. But from a productivity standpoint, I enjoy and I like biometrics. What are some other issues with biometrics? Some other bad things about biometrics? And maybe this is one you haven't thought about. How many fingers do you have? How many fingers do most of you have? You have 11 fingers. Okay, cool. So most of us have 10. Some of us have 9 or 8. What happens once a biometric signature has been compromised? Like it has been copied or stolen, or you lost a finger or whatever, or you got a cut. Like right now I've got a blister on my thumb, so it doesn't work that well, but luckily I have 9 more fingers. But the biggest problem with biometrics is not just that, you know, Big Brother's listening to us, is once compromised, Can't use it anymore. Yeah, so if your fingerprint data is published on the internet, or if you are a very famous person and your face has been like you're Brad Pitt, for example, and your face is all over the internet, it's very likely somebody can easily make a 3D, and you can buy these for about $200. You can buy a Brad Pitt mask and put it over your head, and it would probably work on an iPhone. So it's difficult to change, and it's difficult to kind of hide. So the best kind of authentication, I'm going to open up the notes back again because the notes do talk about this. I just wanted to make a big deal about this kind of stuff, passwords, because that's kind of literally the keys to all of our stuff, the keys to all of our data, the keys to all of our systems, all of our networks. And like I said before, the best way to keep hackers and bad people and unauthorized users and things from happening is prevent them from happening. Password's the most common way. But you got to understand that there are caveats. So as somebody mentioned already, a combination of these two or more of those above things works better as required. And of course, also, there always has to be a fallback. There always has to be a fallback. One of the other problems with biometrics, somebody else mentioned, is that, you have to be present. So if you're not present, you need to give access to somebody else, access to get into your home, and you're not there, how are you supposed to get your body there? So we use that, and we also use a fallback, which is either you have to answer some questions. So whenever you sign yourself up for a password, they always ask you for some additional information, 3 to 5 questions that supposedly only you know, or at least only you know that you can enter quickly. Like if you mess up your bank password, they'll ask you, well, what's your mother's maiden name? What was your high school mascot? What was your first grade teacher's name? Things that you're going to remember in the world, but you have to type those in within a couple minutes or it'll lock you out. Also two-factor. So what is two-factor authentication? It's not the same thing as combination or fallback. What does two-factor mean? It really shouldn't be called two-factor. It should be called two-way. I don't know who decided to call it two-factor, probably Bill Gates. It's two-way authentication. In other words, I authenticate to you, you authenticate to me. This is how I have my Google stuff set up. So when I log into my Google account from a new computer or a computer that I've wiped all the cookies off of, it immediately sends a text to my phone or a code to my phone and says, was that you that logged in? Or I have to type in a code. Or I get a phone call. It says, hey, you need to type in this 2-digit code. Here it is. And then I go back to the screen I was on and I have to type in that code. So it's essentially working in both directions. I authenticate to you, you authenticate back to me. So that works the best if you have not enabled two-factor authentication on your critical items like your Google account, because it is so ubiquitous and everywhere, your bank accounts. Next best thing to two-factor authentication or two-way authentication is audit authentication, where whenever you do log into a system, or whenever somebody logs in and pretends to be you, you get an email or you get a text that says, hey, we saw that you've logged in at 9:30 in the morning from this IP address, which is located in Beijing, China, for example, wherever it is. So that's more of a detective control, but my Vanguard, my bank accounts do that. So whenever I access my bank accounts online, it sends me an email that says, yes, you accessed the bank online. That's just in case it's not me. Very good idea. Very good stuff to use, two-factor authentication. Let me pull the chapter 11 up, and I'll skip over the stuff I just talked about in the PowerPoint, but some of that wasn't in there. Where's chapter 11? It's in here somewhere. That's okay. I'll just go download it again real quick. Give me just a sec, guys. Surprised it wasn't just in my downloads folder. I'll just go get it off my legacy site. Okay, I think we were right about in this area here. We were talking about risk and these kind of occurrences of threats that happen. We're on step 4 here, documenting the controls. And like I've said many times before, most of what you guys are doing is as network managers is documenting and maintaining and updating your documentation on how you access certain systems and what kind of controls you've put in place to mitigate against certain threats. I'd also mentioned before insurance. So here are the different things that you can do with respect to risk. You can either mitigate the risk, which is what we do for most situations. We use a control to remove or reduce the impact. We use a password. We use a lock. We use something to keep people out of our systems. We share the risk. We transfer all or part of that impact to another company, such as insurance. We defer the risk for non-imminent risks. We recognize, okay, someday we might have a global pandemic and we'll plan for the future, but we're not going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time on that because it doesn't happen that often. Or we know it's going to happen probably 6 months from now, maybe, or maybe a few days from now, like a hurricane, but we will deal with it when it gets here, or we'll plan to deal with it when we can. Then there's a certain level of risk acceptance. Some companies choose to do very little to nothing about threats to certain assets, such as workstation computers. Most companies don't actually do that much to protect a workstation computer other than training you guys. What they do is they say, well, if a workstation computer dies, you temporarily as an employee, whip out your cell phone or go to another office or go to another cubicle and use that computer until we get you a replacement to use. Or we put it in the hands of the employee. That's a risk acceptance or risk sharing. In other words, if you as an employee are allowed to use and given tools by your company to use, such as a laptop, such as a cell phone, such as a car, you usually sign a document that says you are 100% responsible for that asset. And if you don't take appropriate precaution, then you're responsible. You got to pay us for it. So that's how a lot of organizations deal with workstation tools or employee tools that they give to their employees. They basically have you as the user sign a document which says you agree to pay for it. So that goes hand in hand with insurance as well as risk acceptance. The insurance is we insure that you're insuring it for us as an employee, and also they know that not every employee is going to return everything. Not every employee is going to be able to replace a computer. So they do have a little bit of that built into their budget as well. Most companies have a certain loss that they'll accept on workstations, for example, like 10% a year, for example, just because through attrition or through them breaking down. It is infeasible to mitigate all risks, mostly because of cost. We cannot afford it. Can't afford to do everything. Costs too much. Like, it'd be great to put biometrics on everything and put redundant hard drives and redundant power supplies on everything, but we just can't do it. So we don't protect every single asset. We only protect the most important assets. Sorry, I don't know why that's there. This is important. Evaluate the adequacy of the controls and the degrees of risk and test them. Establish priorities for dealing with threats to network securities. That's important because a lot of times, like in the case of a natural disaster, for example, a natural disaster or a man-made disaster or something like a fire, that is catastrophic for a lot of companies because it affects so many different systems. So there needs to be an order of repair or an order of operations or an order that you follow for when something occurs, when a threat occurs that affects multiple systems. What do you bring up first? What's most important? Typically the servers and the data are most important to bring those up. And then the connectivity to that data is the second most important thing to bring up. And then way down on the bottom is the workstations and the employees. They're usually at the bottom, far down that list. As far as a company's continuity, their business continuity is concerned. Companies don't really care about you that much. I mean, yes, they do, but no, they don't really, because they know that you can take care of yourself. You can get another job. We can fire you because we know you can get another job. Can't really fire a server. I guess you could fire a server, but that just means you're going to have to buy another server and throw that one away. That's a sad fact of the world, is that employees and users of a network, in terms of us being part of a network system, are on the bottom of the totem pole. It's all about ensuring business continuity, making certain that organizations' data and applications will continue to operate even in the face of disruption, destruction, and disaster. So let's talk a little bit more about disruption, destruction, and disaster, by the way. Now, how often do disasters happen? Not very often. So what do most companies do to mitigate against disaster, would you guess? Insurance. That's what most of them do. They just buy insurance. But the next best thing to do would be hire a disaster recovery firm. That can come in and help you prioritize and even sometimes provide temporary services, temporary laptops, or temporary facilities for your employees to work in if your building is not occupiable because it either burned down or the governor closed it or whatever it is. Disaster recovery plan. And the book does not talk enough about this, but this is a really important thing that all network managers need to have in their back pocket. Almost literally in their back pocket. Try to blow that up. Disaster recovery plan. It's not a matter of if a disaster is going to occur. Eventually a disaster will occur. Like this COVID-19 thing that we're experiencing right now. This is a disaster. A disaster recovery plan, and usually what we do as network managers these days is we download a sample, or we download a template, or we use something like a NIST disaster recovery guideline. What a disaster recovery plan is it lists out things like responsibilities, who does what and their contact information. It lists out what is most important down to least important. And first, in other words, what you do first, what you do second, what you do third. Some small companies, their disaster recovery plan is a piece of paper that's taped next to the server in their server room. It has a telephone number on it and an email address. It says, if there's a problem, you can't get into the network, call Jake, here's his cell phone number. That's a very simple disaster recovery plan, but it's pretty common for most of my small clients. They need to know who to call. That's the most important part of a disaster recovery plan, is the contacts. Who do we call when there is a problem? This disaster recovery plan needs to be physically locatable and duplicated. You can't leave it on a network in a text document or a Word document, because if that network is destroyed, you don't have access to that plan anymore. So these plans are usually either in the cloud somewhere, or they're duplicated onto Google Docs, and 2 or more people that are active with the company that have that are trusted and have responsibilities are told where to find this information. The federal government is really big on disaster recovery plans these days. So if something happens, they tear open a special book and they start reading through it. Even as far back as Apollo, well, they learned a lot of this from Apollo 11. Or was it Apollo 13? What was it? What was the movie? Houston, we have a problem. Is it Apollo 11? I'm in a mind fart right now. Pretty sure it was Apollo 11. When they said, Houston, we've got a problem at Mission Control, they had a disaster recovery plan that it might have been 13. I think I'm remembering it wrong. They had a plan. Wasn't a great plan, and obviously they had to reinvent a lot of things on the fly. But we learned a lot after that incident. And a lot of companies, I think, learned a lot after watching that movie. They're like, oh crap, we need to have this stuff written down somewhere with contingencies in place. Contingencies, if you don't know what that word means, go look it up. What do we do if something is not available? What do we do if we can't get into something? What do we do if a hard drive crashes? Got to have contingencies for everything. So here's different protections. Virus protection, that's the simplest and most common because it's easy. Usually we do it, by the way, no longer on the workstation. We do it through UTM. Did I mention UTM in the previous class? Bro that up. UTM, Unified Threat Management. Unified Threat Management is a concept where we don't rely on the workstation to have the virus checking software on it, because again, that goes back to behavior. And what a lot of you guys like to do as an employee is, oh dang, I can't access Netflix because of this stupid virus thing on my computer. I'm going to turn it off and disable it so I can watch Netflix while I'm at work. You know, if we leave it up to the employee or the student, not because you're bad or evil, you're just maybe uneducated or you want to get around something, you can potentially break things. So with Unified Threat Management, we use the firewall or gateway or a connecting device that's connecting our network to the outside world. We put all the virus checking and the firewalling and checking of data in and out on that device so that it does it for a whole network. And then that's managed by a network manager who knows what he's doing. In other words, it's professionally managed, either by an employee of that company, or you hire software or you hire a company to manage that threat for you, and they update that firewall for you, like SonicWall, for example, or Sophos, or even Cisco has a managed. All these companies that create routers and routing software all have a UTM product, a Unified Threat Management product. It takes the responsibility out of your hands and out of your employees' hands and puts it into the hands of professionals. It's a much smarter thing to do. You're not going to be able to know all the possible contingencies. These companies are experts at finding viruses and getting them reported on. Gosh, I hate what's my computer doing today. Denial of service. Did I talk about denial of service at all? I will. Let's go a little bit faster in this. I'll get back to this. So virus protection. Nearly all organizations experience computer viruses. Widespread infection is less common. Here's all the different terms for viruses. Viruses, worms, trojans, malware, spyware, adware, rootkits. You don't need to know what all of these things are individually. You can go look all of these things up. And this is a little bit outdated. Again, we don't really mitigate that threat so much with antivirus software. In fact, a lot of organizations don't even run antivirus software on the workstations anymore. They do it on those firewall devices, these unified threat management devices. There's so many more better reasons to do it there. What are some disadvantages, guys, when you guys have installed firewall software or virus protection software? Why is virus protection at the workstation bad? Protection cons. What are the cons of it? Yeah, it slows your performance down because everything, depending on how you set it up, everything coming into and going out of your computer is viewed or reviewed by that virus checking software. And if you don't have a very fast computer, your computer can be slowed down by as much as 50% or more. It's terrible. Also, maybe you're trying to get to certain websites that are legitimate, but you can't get there because the virus protection software has falsely identified that website as a bad site to go to. In other words, it gets in the way. Security gets in the way. Also, you as an employee, you're not always the best at updating your virus protection software, or you try to circumvent it. You're not an expert. You're not a virus protection checking expert. Also, if you're a home user or it's left up to you as an employee to install your own virus software and you don't update it or you don't install it because you didn't know you're supposed to, you could get a virus. Now, these days, most people aren't getting viruses that actually damage anything at all on their computer. What do you think the most common virus is, or most common, we should just call it malware? Any software that gets on your computer that does something you don't want it to do, what's the most common? Yeah, it's either a rootkit and what a rootkit is, and maybe it's not even a rootkit. That's not the right thing to call it. It is code that is hacking something else. In other words, you get a program on your computer that will go try hacking into other sites, banks, for example, or credit reporting agencies or financial institutions, and they're running on your computer. What the bad guys are doing is they don't do the hacking from their sites anymore. They get malware installed onto your computer, and then your computer does the job. And why is that better? Because it doesn't point the fingers back at them. And also it's using somebody else's resources. It's the best way to do hacking. Best way to do hacking is to get somebody else to do it for you, whether they realized it or not. So that's what's going on a lot of times. And a lot of times when we do find hacking going on and we block websites or we block IP addresses, a lot of times we're blocking legitimate IP addresses from users that are using their computer, and they just happen to have been compromised. By the way, that term compromised, that is where you received, or that was a successful malware attack. In other words, your computer or your system has been compromised. It's either got code on it, you don't know what it's doing, or people were able to get access to the data. on your system. But again, usually viruses are malware that's doing something else, so that they don't really care about your stuff at all. They don't give a shit about you. They just want to they want your laptop to hack the FBI or to hack chase.com or whatever it is. Very successful stuff. A denial of service attack. These happen a lot. Denial of service attacks are more often distributed denial of service attacks, or attacks that happen for the purposes of taking a system down, not necessarily to access a system, but to remove a system from being useful. In other words, if we can't get into a system, let's kill that system so nobody can use it. Either so that we can maybe take some cameras out, or take a security system out so that we can get into something. So denial of service attacks, the way those work is a bunch of people download this new app on their cell phone, this new awesome app. Oh, cool, I got this new app that lets me do things and talk to everybody, like TikTok, for example. Let's pretend TikTok is bad. Anybody use TikTok in here? Or we should actually use one that's real. There's a lot of these little apps that you can download. There was one called Bubble Level. You could download that, and it would basically turn your phone into a level. And I installed it, and the way I knew this was a problem is I went and installed this thing. It says Bubble Level would like access to your to the data on your phone, to your camera, to your location data. I'm like, you're being a Bubble Level. You don't need all of this access to 10 different things. And a few months later, it was reported that this particular app was actually spyware or malware that people were putting on their cell phones to allow hackers, whenever they wanted to basically take over your cell phone or run a program on it at a predefined time in the future. So if 10,000 people in the world put this app on their phone, a hacker could push a button and turn all 10,000 of those cell phones on, pointed to one target, such as whitehouse.gov, for example, or amazon.com, pointed at one target, which would simply attack it. And the way attacks work, denial of service attacks work, is it's kind of like this. You as a web surfer, you're going to a certain website and you expect a response back and you get a page back. But if you're a computer program that's a denial of service computer program, you attempt to access a web server 50 times in 1 second or 100 times in 1 second, and you ignore the responses. So when a web session is created, or I should say a TCP session is created, your client computer finds a server computer in the world. It wakes it up, says, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you. The server says, okay, I will create a TCP session or a tunnel between you and me. What do you want to say? And then presumably your client program, your web browser, would start requesting web pages. Well, the denial of service program simply doesn't send any more responses, and that session stays open for 30 to 60 seconds, or maybe as long as 300 seconds or 5 minutes. How many TCP ports are there on a server to use on one particular server? 65535. Now, not all of those are available for a web server, so there might be 1,000 ports available. So if all 1,000 ports, if all 1,000 lines or channels, you can pretend these are like telephone lines, are being used, and they're being used for 5 minutes at a time, nobody else can talk to that web server for several minutes. So that's a basic explanation as to what denial of service is it's programs that are pretending to be web browsers or email programs or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be a web browser. Requesting access from a web server and then ignoring the response and then simply opening another request. It's kind of like prank calling. Anybody ever do prank calling when they were a kid? Or we also call it demon dialing. Call up your grandma, and hello, and you hang up on her, and call her back again. Hello, you hang up on her again, call her back again. You keep calling her back because you think it's funny to make her get up or whatever. Or you're being a punky kid or whatever. Yeah, war dialing, demon dialing. That's basically what computer programs are doing in a denial of service attack. They're daemon dialing servers. So the server eventually gets so busy it can't provide services to legitimate users of the system. So the hacker, or the handler in this case, fires off a program at a predetermined time, or sometimes this is automated, sometimes just at a certain time and day, like Columbus Day 2008. Just this program's going to fire off and it's going to bring down Amazon.com, for example. It's happened in the past. eBay went down because of one not too long ago. Chase Bank went down for several hours not too long ago because of one. So how do we stop this kind of thing from happening? Again, we're using not stuff on an organization's workstations or even servers. We put things in front of the organization's network and the internet that we typically call firewalls or gateway or traffic analysis devices, which are looking for anomalies. And the smarter ones will do things like they'll be a little bit smart. So if they get like 1,000 requests from one IP address in 10 seconds, well, that's probably a computer program, and they will simply create a rule that will ignore or drop or deny all traffic from that website for a certain amount of time, or that IP address, I should say. So I have filters like that that run on all of my servers. If you try to log into any of my servers, either manually or with a program, after 5 failed attempts, it will lock you out for 15 minutes. Then you can try again in 15 minutes. At 5 more failed attempts, it'll lock you out for 30 minutes. You try a third time and it'll lock you out indefinitely. Yeah, fail to ban actually is what it's called, Rahi. Fail to ban. Fail to nab. Fail to ban. Fail to ban is actually a code, a program that was written. That's not the concept, but what it is it's a program which is running. It's a detective control that's running and looking at logs. And if it sees, hey, I'm seeing a lot of failed logins from a certain IP address, it will employ a filter to the company's gateway router or the company's firewall that'll say, I am no longer going to accept any traffic from that IP address because it's probably a hacker or it's probably been compromised. Sometimes it ends up locking out legitimate users. I've accidentally locked myself out of a network because I plugged in a device like a phone on my network that wasn't programmed properly. And it tried to log into a server and failed 5 times. And then that locked out my whole IP, which everything else on my home network was behind that same IP. Here's some other things that we can do to ensure business continuity. Theft protection. Usually theft protection is done at the physical layer preventatively. We lock things up. We hide things. Now, as I said before, obscurity is no replacement for security, but it does slow the bad guys down. That's, we want to slow them down. Eventually, anything can be gotten into. It's just a matter of how much money and how much time the bad guys want to take. Now, in a perfect world, in terms of unauthorized access or intruders, if there were no such thing as bad people, we wouldn't need passwords. We wouldn't need locks on our doors. We wouldn't need theft protection mitigation because that stuff takes time and costs money. Anybody ever see these movies with the single young girl living in an apartment in New York, and she goes to leave her apartment, she's got to unlock 5 or 6 locks on the door, 5 or 6 deadbolt locks on the door to get out of her apartment? So let's say she's trying to come home one night and some bad guy's following her. She's trying to get into her apartment. She's got 5 or 6 locks to unlock from the outside. She ain't going to make it. In other words, security, which is a necessity, brand new word, a necessity, security gets in the way. I want to make that bigger. Security is a necessary evil because of evil. At least is in terms of unauthorized access. Now, there's a lot of bad things that happen in the world that have nothing to do with bad people, such as device failure. Okay, so we've talked, all this stuff is up here that's talking about unauthorized access, and viruses are unauthorized access. security, necessary evil because of evil people and evil companies like Amazon and Microsoft. Yes, they're kind of evil in some ways in that they're trying to steal marketing information. So what's the other stuff that's not evil by design, doesn't try to be evil, is device failure. Eventually hard drives fail, or power fails, or just something gets old and dies because it's old. So here are the kinds of things that we do to mitigate device failure. All devices will fail eventually, just like all people will fail eventually. Methods for reducing failures or their impacts: redundancy. That's the key, by the way. The key to unauthorized access is prevention with passwords. The key to device failure, key is redundancy. Having more than one thing. So if you had a lot of money and it was very important that you have a vehicle or a method of conveyance from point A to point B, you might have, in terms of redundancy, you might have 2 cars in your driveway. That's a little expensive. Or you might have 1 car and 1 bus pass. Or 1 car and 1 friend that you can call and say, hey, my car broke down. Can you drive me someplace? I need to get to work. So redundancy doesn't necessarily mean 2 of everything. It can, but that's the most expensive way to do it, like 2 hard drives. If everybody had to have 2 hard drives in their system in case one fails, and you have them in a mirror, that's a little expensive, and it also adds some extra hardware that we don't necessarily want or need in our laptop computers. So usually redundancy is you're using a primary system, 1 car or 1 hard drive, and then you have a backup system. You're copying the data off that hard drive into the cloud. Or in the case of electricity, the most common, well, let's talk about redundancy again. So make sure you understand that term RAID. I think I've mentioned RAID before, not the bug spray, but RAID. What does RAID stand for? Redundant, well, it's right there. Redundant array of independent disks. And the way RAID works is it assumes that one of those disk drives in a system will fail. So you take, for example, 2 drives and you put the same data at exactly the same time on both drives. So if one drive fails, the other drive can still offer that data to you. If both drives fails, you're screwed, but usually 1 drive at a time will fail. So 1 will fail. You have a limited amount of time, of course, to replace that one failed one before the second one fails. You replace the failed one with a new one. The old one that was still there working will begin copying itself over to the new one. Sometimes takes a few minutes, sometimes takes a few hours to do what's called recopying or resilvering itself, making itself good again. So the most common method now for doing RAID, by the way, and you guys need to know this, is called ZFS. So you can go Google for ZFS RAID, and it will help you understand this a lot more about redundancy. ZFS is an operating, a disk operating system. It's kind of like NTFS or FAT32, or maybe stuff that you've heard of. It's a way of putting data onto a hard drive. ZFS knows how to put data onto 2 hard drives or 5 hard drives or 10 hard drives that represent 1 volume of information. ZFS is the best way to do it right now. We used to use hardware RAID, but we don't use hardware RAID anymore. Bad thing with hardware RAID is if the hardware RAID controller fails, or if you need to take those drives out of that machine because the motherboard failed and put those drives into another machine, you may not be able to read the RAID array. Usually once you take hard drives out of a hardware RAID, the RAID is destroyed, the data goes away. With ZFS RAID, because it's done at the software level in the OS, you can take those drives out of a machine and put them into another machine in any order that you want, because they're all numbered and labeled. the new machine, as long as you install the ZFS operating system, can import that old ZFS data. So it's like having 10 employees in your business and you're each responsible for one specific task, not one employee responsible for everything. If something happens to the location where you normally meet, as long as those 10 people can meet up somewhere else, like we can't meet at school to finish this work, but we can go meet at, when they start opening the Starbucks and stuff, or we can go meet at church, or we can all meet at my house and get something done. You can all identify each other and say, well, I've got my 10% of the thing I'm doing. So hardware rate bad, ZFS good. UPS, uninterruptible power supply. These are, well, you guys already have UPSs on your laptops. That's the battery that's running in your laptop. So uninterruptible power supplies mitigate a power outage. What's the likelihood of a power outage at most people's homes and small businesses? 100%. They don't happen all the time, or do they? A lot of times your power at your home flickers, maybe for 1/10 of a second. All it takes is 1/10 of a second for power to go out, for your computer or your server or whatever, your network to go down, your cable modem to go offline. All it takes is just a few seconds. And 99.9% of power outages are literally 1 to 2 seconds. They don't last forever. We're not talking about lightning strikes. We're not talking about somebody ran into a power pole also, although that happens. Not nearly as common. It's just the power flickering for a split second. And that's what UPSs are designed for. They're basically, they're a little bit better than the power strip. They have batteries inside of them. And they are redundant. They are redundifying the grid power. Grid power is not reliable because, why is grid power? When I say grid power, what am I talking about? Grid power. What is grid power? If I say I get my power from the grid, in other words, I'm getting it from a network. The electrical system is a network that's providing power, but where are the servers of the electricity? Does anybody know where Houston's electrical servers are? There's a big plant down next to Damon, or down next to the Brazos Bend State Park, if you've been down there recently, which provides power to the lower half of Texas. Fortunately, we're pretty close to it. But if we're in Dallas or San Antonio, they have smaller power plants there too, but they get some of their power from us as well. If you're down in Victoria, for example, the further away you are from something, the more likelihood that a cable's going to get cut or there will be an outage. Same thing when I talked about mitigating against WAN outages. The further away you are from the source, the more likely it is for that service to not be available. So if you live right next to the power plant, you're probably pretty good. But if you live 150 miles away, you're probably going to have some power issues. So uninterruptible power supply, super important for even workstation computers, because when our power goes out, pretty much kills everything. Most companies' servers these days, if you are still running your own servers, you must be using uninterruptible power supplies, because if the power goes out on a workstation, you can usually turn it back on. The power goes out on a server. It might take that server 10, 20, 30 minutes to boot back up. Furthermore, you may lose a lot of data, or it might not boot back up. I've had lots of servers, particularly Windows servers, that if the power goes out right in the middle of something that they were doing that was very important, the server won't boot up again. Even workstations, that happens sometimes. And finally, we have what's called clustering. Clustering is where we have, I'm sorry about that black line, you see that? Clustering or failover servers, that's where we have redundant devices that come into play only when the primary device fails. We have hot spare hard drives, for example, hot spare servers, I have actually hot spare routers in my data center. So if the primary router fails, the secondary router says, I'll take over, and takes on all the IP addresses, and it's physically connected to all the same networks, public and private, and it takes over when your primary fails, but it's not doing anything And actually failover a lot of times is better than RAID, because in RAID array systems, all the drives are running, whether you're actually using them or not. The drives are spinning and running. Whereas in a failover cluster, those devices only come online and start actually getting used when they're needed, when they're called upon. In fact, a lot of servers, a lot of fancier systems, the servers are literally off. The power's off until a monitoring device notices, hey, your main server's down. Let me turn the power on for the secondary server and boot it up. And it becomes your main server temporarily or maybe permanently, depending on how you have it set up. Mentioned disaster recovery plans already. Most organizations outsource, most large organizations order a firm to do this for them. Go Google for sample disaster recovery plans, and that will help you with understanding that. Let's see how much more there is to this. There's a little bit more to this chapter. But I kind of run out of time. So what I want to do is I'm going to have another meeting before Monday. I'll publish it. You guys can optionally participate in that meeting, or I will just record it and publish it asynchronously on YouTube along with this meeting and talk about the rest of chapter 11, more specifically about policies. And I'm not talking about like written policies, I'm talking about network policies, what a firewall is, what an ACL rule is. These things are important to know as network managers, probably more important as tech people, but network managers need to know the general concept of these things. Network address translation, need to talk about that. Encryption, we'll talk about encryption. Symmetric and asymmetric encryption. There's a lot to chapter 11. User profiles, DMZ, demilitarized zone. So I got about another hour of talking here, but I'm out of time. So like I said, I'll do an asynchronous meeting, make it a separate video online up, but I'll have a Zoom meeting. I'll publish that. So if anybody's not doing anything, like I'm thinking Saturday morning. So if anybody's not doing anything Saturday morning, I'll probably go ahead and have another Zoom meeting for this class to finish up chapter 11 on Saturday morning. Tentatively, it's something like 9 o'clock. I'll publish this in plenty of time for you guys to be able to attend if you want to, but otherwise I'll put it on YouTube, okay? I'll see you guys on possibly Saturday, but definitely Monday for our last day of class, where we will finish through chapter 12. Chapter 11, really important stuff. Make sure you're reading through that, and also that you are looking up these concepts and these terms that I've already talked about. And I will publish this list as well, the stuff I've been talking about. Stick that on there too.
Hey, Professor.
What's that?
Wait, so is the test not Monday? Am I wrong? I thought the test was on Monday.
Test will be made available Monday, but we're still going to have a class on Monday. Remember,
okay.
all my tests are online, so you can take them whenever you want. I'm going to give you guys until Saturday at midnight, next Saturday at midnight, to finish that test.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you got lots of time to get that test done. So right now, I want you guys to just concentrate on, making your draw.io drawings and sharing that with me so I can check them out. For those of you that need to make up those other assignments, email me so I can talk about Sophos and VirtualBox. Reading through the chapter 10 notes a little closer, chapter 11 notes, and getting ready for that test. I'll make sure that the exam 3 notes are available online before Monday. Thank you. Have a good weekend if I don't hear from you guys.
Professor, I got a question about one of the extra credits.
Yeah, what's the question?
There was one where you install a firewall or something.
Yeah.
I know that is one of the assignments in open systems. So could I just install Sophos and take a screenshot and submit it for my 4477?
And I'll explain that to you offline if you want, but I got a few minutes here. Basically, what I want people to do in the 4477 class is install VirtualBox and do it on their workstation. So you install VirtualBox, build a virtual machine of something like a CentOS 7 or CentOS 8, install Linux, in other words, the GUI flavor of Linux, and then install Sophos in another virtual box session and force your CentOS workstation to use Sophos to get to the outside world. I think that's a really good exercise in setting up a virtual environment, understanding how a firewall works in real life, because setting up little workstation firewalls on your own workstation as an application is not really a good real world example. So that's what that's going to be. So again, if you send me an email, I'll describe specifically in email what I'd like to see in that extra credit. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
See you guys on Saturday or Monday.